他们是 ChatGPT 核心研发科学家，前 OpenAI 研究员。作为人工智能神经进化领域的顶尖专家 ，Kenneth Stanley 发明了增强拓扑的神经进化和新奇性搜索算法，可能是大模型涌现能力的答案。Joel Lehman 是 Uber 人工智能实验室的创始成员，致力于机器创造力、进化计算和人工智能安全性研究。他们共同撰写了《为什么伟大不能被计划》一书。欢迎 Kenneth Stanley、Joel Lehman。
So my first question is regarding the history and its current progress on AI innovation. Compared to 50 years ago, at the beginning days of AI, all the way to the start of OpenAI company, and all the way to the present, nowadays, what has changed in terms of AI innovation? And what are the new opportunities for the AI researchers this day?
I guess what I could say is that there have been dramatic changes just over the last couple decades. So the research that I began my academic career with under Ken involved neural networks with, 10, 20, 30 neurons. And now we talk about neural networks that have billions of neurons. So it's like a dramatic phase shift just from that perspective in terms of how much compute we're playing with, how much data. And you see ups and downs in the paradigms that people talk about. So a theme in AI research is that there are summers and winters where people seem more optimistic or pessimistic about progress. And so, in themes, related to the themes of our book about kind of how the stepping stones are often a little bit confusing in terms of how one technology leads to another. That's definitely true in the history of AI.
Yeah, so that's all very true, and I think like maybe one of the biggest shifts is that even maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you could just start from first principles and do something completely new, basically on your own. Whereas like when I was starting out, you could pretty much just do anything because everything was so cheap. And you could just do it on your own and it would be competitive with whatever was the cutting edge at the time. And so you had a much better chance of justifying something like that, or at least to get off the ground. And so that's just so much different than like now, you need a huge team and you need all these GPUs, and it's just a completely different situation for a new AI researcher.
My next question is regarding the students at our School of Management at Fudan University. So, we have 8 departments in our school, and the students, they are learning courses every day. And do you have in mind any courses that is most related to the non-objective paradigm as you proposed?
I think, at least my experience of kind of like a lot of my courses, and especially as an undergraduate, where you would learn, some subject matter and you'd be tested on it in a pretty kind of, you could say, linear way. And you'll actually have to do something that isn't kind of exactly guided. It could be that the fields that seem kind of orthogonal to technological innovation could sometimes at least be the stepping stones in the direction of developing this kind of less objective, more creative thing. So like things like, developing your own artistic style. So if you're like in a creative writing sort of program, at least you might be developing some intuitions for how to go off, the kind of the beaten path to develop something all your own. And some undergraduate programs may be more or less amenable to you getting your feet wet in research. If research is kind of like one of these broad endeavors that, involves creative exploration and innovation. So finding some way where you can get involved in research rather than, thinking exactly of kind of the course of the discipline.
I think most courses are basically designed exactly opposite of our book. They're all like that. But I would note one other maybe like small thing is that if there's something in the world that's somewhat close to this kind of thing, and maybe it would be investing. I think investors have a general intuitive understanding, even without looking at our book, that you make a number of bets and some may fail and some may succeed. And in some sense, that's exploratory. Like you don't need everything to succeed, but you're willing to try different things. It's not like everything has to be guaranteed to be successful. And that I think is underlying a lot of what we're saying in the book. You're choosing to explore in different directions without knowing where they lead. But as long as you uncover enough interesting stepping stones, some of them probably will pay off, which I think is analogous in some way to what some investors actually do.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. But the many of the students, they are not raised up like with the aimless search type of spirit in their learning habits. So for them, perhaps we can think outside the classroom. What can be those stepping stones they can accumulated over the years of college that can serve as the stepping stones towards a broader mind, an investor's mindset, as you mentioned.
I think one of the kind of the core principles of the book is this ability to kind of follow stepping stones. And as Ken mentioned, that not knowing exactly to where they're leading. And I think we're often implicitly taught growing up to avoid failure. And so I guess any kind of endeavor that helps you to see that failure isn't as bad as you think. I think it's like one thing to help like on the psychological side. But also just like developing your own interests. Like what is it that you're interested in? And, paying attention to what in the world invigorates you, whether it's an interest in like understanding art or history or math. I mean, any field can kind of be any activity you can kind of engage in, I think offers a potential to cultivate your sense of what is interesting and why it's interesting to you.
I think people become very preoccupied very young with what they should be doing. Because that seems to be the path to success, because like people have explained to them, their teachers and their parents have explained to them, this is how you become successful in the world. And because of that, like you lose the ability to follow what's interesting. And it sounds relatively simple, like just doing something because it's interesting, but it's actually, I think, a very hard thing that needs to be exercised like a muscle. It's like doing things that you don't necessarily think you should do, not because they're bad things, but because you don't know how they lead to success. But that's what it means not to know what the objective is. That's what I think people should do. And everybody's different. So what is interesting to you is not what's interesting to me. But you need to learn to trust your instincts about what's interesting and then find out what the reward is for doing it. Because it's not necessarily that somebody's going to necessarily pay you or give you an A. But you learn to trust your instincts, which will be important if you ever want to be creative.
Do you have any suggestion for those people who, already been educated and trained as management professionals? What could be their roles if the scientists start becoming managers?
I mean, everybody brings unique talents, which aren't always just exactly the same as like what your major was. And so, like a particular management professional may have a particularly inspiring vision, ability to connect to people, communities that they know about that are relevant to the business, which the scientist doesn't have. Scientists could have connections to communities that are relevant to a business. That's fine. But they also need to have leadership skills. And so some do, some don't. And so I would look at it more as in the entirety of the individual person than are they a scientist or a management professional.
I guess it's really, I mean, it just seems there's so much knowledge that business professionals might have about how business works that someone who's a scientist just would completely lack. I do think that there is something that managers can learn about how to manage researchers and what kinds of management styles will enable researchers to make interesting discoveries, given the environment where they're kind of supported and cultivated.
I mean, this is a very complex question. But the thing is, like, if you actually understood AI research, you would understand that many other things go into being a successful research leader than just some like standard like credentials. Like your ability to inspire and to pivot and to understand when to give up and when to move to something else. And you don't need to know how to do research and do it yourself, but just to understand how the dynamics of research labs works. Like what makes someone successful in that environment, and what is the culture like? Like what did research actually do on a day-to-day basis?
And thanks for your insightful input. And how you guys can convince the investors, to help you financially in terms of this aimless search of the scientific choice.
Yeah, that's just really interesting question that I think we often hear some version of that question. Because, it seems like investors are very objective on the face of it. Like they want to know what's the revenue, what's the profit projections, they want to just know all these objective things. So how do you be aimless? Like maybe most investors do think that way. But there are clearly special cases where like exploration has been facilitated through investment. And they're just saying, look, the team here has the capacity to explore and we'll come up with something interesting, probably. But I don't know what it is. So I don't know when the revenue will come in. I don't know what the projections, I don't know what kind of product we're even talking about, but they were able to convince people to fund this endeavor. And I think you can, if you look closely around, you can find lots of cases. I mean, even arguably OpenAI was like this. When Elon Musk was investing in OpenAI, there's no like plan to create ChatGPT 5 years later. And so I think you'll find investors are sometimes amenable. And, one reason I think we wrote the book was to make more investors amenable.
Thank you. And my last question also regarding this annual forum of our school of management. What do you think? What does the year 2024 mean for AI education and AI competition?
I think it's always kind of hard to prognosticate exactly about like what trajectory the technology will take. And so I think, one interesting thought is whether 2024 is when AI, hits a wall or not. So, it's unclear whether the trends we've seen so far will continue or not. And so it could be that 2024 is not as, epochal a time as we expect. But if it is, it does seem like competition is kind of accelerating, and if the barrier to entry is lower because everyone is accessing these big models through kind of the prompt engineering paradigm where you're just kind of there's little potential differentiation between you and somebody else. The outcome may be good for society in terms of like many more ideas are tried and many things, many new applications are unlocked, and it might be bad for individual kind of innovators in the sense that, competition is so fierce.
Yeah. Okay. So for 2024, I agree with this idea that there's a big question looming, which is whether AI progress will continue as it has, or whether we'll see some slowdown there. Obviously, a slowdown would be a reason for concern in this industry. But because this depends on unknown factors in research, it's possible. It is possible. And so, but aside from that, it's always very hard strategically to plan in the midst of a massive explosion in realignment, which is what's happening. I mean, there's an explosion of this area and realignment of many people in their priorities who are like in the AI field who like, I've never thought of anything to do with AI. Like everybody's suddenly in AI. And that is a sign of potential oversaturation. It's true, like that there is a danger, as our book alludes to, jumping onto a bandwagon after it's already formed. I mean, that's like the opposite of a novelty search. It's like, let's all move towards the same thing that was novel last year. And that's kind of dangerous. I mean, because you're running into competition instead of away from it. So if you're really, really good at competing in that area, it might be a good idea to run into it because obviously it's a lucrative area. But if you're not super confident that you're the best in the world, that could be very dangerous because they're definitely going to be there with you, competing with you.
Thank you. I see the difficulty of addressing these questions. As you mentioned, this is a big question. But, this is why greatness cannot be planned, right? So we are, looking ahead for the year 2024. And your answers to these questions is nothing but helpful for our students. We can really learn a lot through this. So thanks again, Kenny. Thank you, Joel.